The pool had been Mark's sanctuary for 3 years now. Ever since the divorce finalized, ever since Sarah took most of the furniture and all the comfortable silence from their marriage, the rectangular expanse of chlorinated water had become his refuge. Every morning at 6, before Lily arrived for her weekend visits, he'd swim 30 laps, a meditation in motion, a way to exhaust the anger and confusion that had taken residence in his chest like an unwelcome tenant. This Saturday morning was no different, or so he thought. Mark emerged from the master bedroom at 5:47 a.m., his weathered body moving through the house with the efficiency of routine. 44 years old, divorced, custodian of one 8-year-old daughter every other weekend. These were the coordinates of his current life. He pulled on his swimming trunks in the bathroom, grabbed a towel from the linen closet, and padded barefoot through the sliding glass doors that opened onto the backyard. The Arizona morning was already warm, that particular kind of heat that promised the day would be brutal by noon. His pool glimmered under the pre-dawn sky, that perfect shade of crystalline blue he'd maintained religiously. The filter hummed its familiar mechanical lullaby. Mark took 3 steps toward the water and stopped. Something was wrong. The blue wasn't quite right. It was darker in some places, murky where it should be clear. He moved closer, his bare feet whispering across the concrete deck. There, near the deep end, a cloudy turquoise fog seemed to hover just beneath the surface, like someone had stirred up sediment. "What the hell?" he muttered. He grabbed the long-handled net from its hook on the fence and waded in. The water felt colder than usual, or maybe his hands were already shaking with that particular anxiety that came with unexpected problems. Mark had spent the last 3 years learning that life's disasters rarely announced themselves. They crept in sideways. He swept the net through the cloudy section, encountering resistance. Something solid. He pulled upward, and the net emerged carrying what looked like a piece of yellow plastic, dripping with that same murky suspension. It was a bucket, a child's beach bucket, the kind with a shovel attachment. But it was caked with something paint, Mark realized with a growing sense of dread. Not regular paint. This was craft paint, the kind in those plastic bottles you bought at Dollar General. It looked like it had been mixed with water, and Jesus, was that glitter? Actual glitter mixed into the water. Mark dropped the bucket on the concrete and waded deeper, his net now moving with purpose, with fear. He found more objects. A paintbrush, its bristles stiff and laden with color. What appeared to be an empty paint bottle, purple. Another bucket, this one red. And drifting near the filter intake like a tiny ship, a plastic cup with "World's Best Dad" printed on it in faded letters, a Father's Day gift from last year when he'd left at Lily's mother's house. His chest tightened. He climbed out of the pool, water cascading from his legs, and looked toward the house. The guest bedroom window, the one he'd set up as Lily's room with the twin bed and the butterfly mobile, was dark. She wasn't supposed to arrive until 10 this morning. Sarah was dropping her off late because of some dentist appointment. Mark walked back inside, his feet leaving wet prints on the tile. He grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter and opened the text thread with Sarah. The last message was from Thursday. "Lily's excited to see you. She's been talking about the pool all week." He scrolled back, his thumb moving mechanically. Nothing about early arrival, nothing about any change in the schedule. He called her anyway. It rang 4 times before Sarah's groggy voice answered. "It's 5:58 in the morning, Mark. What?" "Is Lily with you?" A pause. He could hear her shifting in bed, probably looking at the clock to make sure she wasn't already late. "What? No, she's asleep. She's with me. Why?" "You're sure?" "Mark, what's going on?" He didn't answer. He hung up and stood very still in his kitchen, water pooling around his feet, staring at nothing. Mark spent the next 40 minutes examining the damage with the methodical precision of a man assembling evidence for a trial he didn't understand he was in. He took photographs. He called his pool maintenance company, reaching voicemail at this hour. He watched YouTube videos about paint contamination in residential pools. The numbers that kept appearing on screen made his stomach turn. Removal costs between $1,500 and $5,000, depending on severity. The possibility of permanent filter damage. The likelihood that draining and refilling would be necessary. $5,000. That was roughly 1 month's mortgage at a bank manager's salary. That was part of the college fund he'd been carefully building for Lily's future. That was the vacation to San Diego he'd promised her for her birthday. By the time his phone rang at 9:47 a.m., Mark had worked himself into a state of contained fury, the kind that felt rational, justified, aimed at the universe's fundamental unfairness but not yet directed at any specific person. It was Sarah. "I'm about 20 minutes out," she said, no preamble, the way she talked now, efficient, businesslike, stripped of the warmth that had once defined their conversations. "Lily's in the car. She's been talking nonstop about the pool. She has a new—" Sarah paused, and Mark heard something in that pause, some infinitesimal hesitation. "She has a new art project she wants to show you." "An art project?" "Yeah, she's been really into painting lately. I bought her those cheap craft paints. She wanted to bring them to your house, but I told her we don't do messy art at your place. Too nice. I made her leave them at home." Another pause. "You're okay with that, right? With the boundaries?" Mark's throat felt dry. "Sarah, I need you to ask Lily something." "What?" "Ask her if she went to the pool this morning." Silence, then in the background, a child's voice, Lily's voice, high and innocent. "Mommy, is Daddy on the phone?" More silence, then Sarah, slower now, more careful. "Mark, what happened?" "Just ask her." He heard the muffled sound of Sarah's hand over the phone. Then, very small and distant, Lily's voice saying something. Then Sarah again, her voice different now, tighter, with that particular strain that came from managing a situation she didn't fully understand. "Mark, she says no. She says she didn't go to the pool. She says she's been with me the whole time. She's right here in the car." But Mark heard something else beneath Sarah's words. He heard the question his ex-wife wasn't asking out loud but was asking nonetheless. "What do you think your daughter did?" He heard the implication. "What are you accusing her of?" And under that, the deeper implication. "This is why the marriage didn't work. This is why you're a cautious man in a world that has moved past caution." "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," Mark said quietly. There's been damage to the pool. Someone put paint in it." "Paint? What kind of paint?" "The craft kind, kid paint." Another silence. He could almost hear Sarah's mind working, could almost see her face in the rearview mirror, checking on Lily, reassessing everything. "Well," Sarah said slowly, "it wasn't Lily. She's been with me since last night. We had dinner with Tom and his kids. She was with us the whole evening." Tom, her boyfriend, the man who'd taken up residence in the house Mark had paid for, sleeping in the bed Mark had chosen. Mark pushed the thought away. "Okay," he said, "then we don't know who did it. Probably just kids from the neighborhood. You know how it is. Neighborhood kids are always looking for trouble." "Yeah," Mark said, "probably." But he didn't believe it. He didn't believe it because the buckets were exact matches to the ones he'd bought for Lily last summer, primary colors with shovels attached. He didn't believe it because the paint bottles were the cheap ones you got in bulk packs at the Dollar General on Maple Street, the same ones Sarah had mentioned Lily wanted to bring. He didn't believe it, but he couldn't say why he didn't believe it, not without admitting something he wasn't ready to admit. Sarah arrived at 10:15 with Lily in tow. Through the front window, Mark watched them pull into the driveway, Sarah's sensible Volkswagen, 3 years old, practical and dependable. Lily emerged from the back seat with the careful deliberation of a small person unbuckling herself, and his heart did that thing it always did, contracted sharply, then expanded with such tenderness it hurt. She was wearing her favorite sundress, the yellow one with the embroidered daisies. Her hair, which had her mother's auburn curls but Mark's darker complexion, was pulled back with a plastic butterfly clip. She looked exactly like a normal 8-year-old on a normal Saturday morning, with no culpability, no guilt, no knowledge of destruction. Mark opened the door before they could knock. "Hey, buddy," he said to Lily, and his voice came out normal, which was its own kind of miracle. "Hi, Daddy." She threw her arms around his legs. She still did this full-bodied hug at his waist. He was treasuring these embraces, knowing on some level that they had an expiration date, that she would soon become too old for such unself-conscious affection. He ruffled her hair, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Good morning, Mark," Sarah said, more formal. She was wearing sunglasses despite the morning hour, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She looked tired. She always looked tired now. "Sarah, thanks for bringing her early." "You said," Sarah paused. "Did I misread the text? I thought you said 10 o'clock. "No, I didn't text. You just said—" He stopped himself. "Never mind, you're here. Come on in, Lily." He held the door open, and Lily skipped through, already chattering about her week, about her friend Madison's birthday party, about a test she'd gotten an A on. Normal daughter talk. Innocent daughter talk. Sarah hovered in the threshold, her eyes moving across his face with that diagnostic intensity that had always unsettled him. She could read him the way he could read a balance sheet, not perfectly, but well enough. "I'll pick her up at 5, Sarah said, "not 6. "Actually, it might be 6. He invented quickly, "I have a work call that might run late." 5, Sarah said again firmly, "I have plans." She didn't. He could tell by the way she said it, by the slight defensive edge. She was just establishing boundaries, drawing lines, maintaining the careful geometry of their post-divorce relationship. "Okay," he said, 5. She kissed Lily on the top of her head, a gesture so brief it barely registered, and turned back to her car without another word. Mark watched her reverse out of the driveway, and only when her car was out of sight did he turn back to find Lily already heading toward the kitchen. "Can we have breakfast?" she asked. "I'm super hungry." "Sure, buddy, what do you want?" "Pancakes with chocolate chips." "You got it." He made the pancakes while Lily sat at the breakfast bar, swinging her legs and regaling him with the detailed account of her week. She talked about school, about the art project they were doing, watercolor landscapes, irony, the universe whispered, about the movie she'd watched with Tom that wasn't very good. She never mentioned paint. She never mentioned the pool. She never gave any indication that anything unusual had occurred. By the time they sat down to eat, Mark had almost convinced himself that he was paranoid, that the paint in the pool was indeed the work of neighborhood vandals, that his daughter was sitting across from him with maple syrup on her chin and no deception in her heart. "Almost. So," he said carefully, cutting his pancake into small, deliberate pieces, "did you bring anything to show me today?" "Yeah, I have my drawings from school. Want to see?" "Sure, after breakfast." She pulled out a folder from her backpack while they ate, and he flipped through the pages, sketches of houses, a drawing of their family labeled Me, Mommy, and Daddy. Though crossed out, with Tom's stick figure drawn in next to Sarah's, a watercolor landscape that showed surprising technical skill for an 8-year-old. "These are really good, Lily. You're a real artist." "I want to do a big project," she said, her voice taking on that particular conspiratorial tone that children use when they're about to reveal something they think is important. "Something really colorful. I told Mommy I wanted to bring my paint to your house, but she said no because she was worried about the furniture." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Your paint?" "Yeah, those craft paints, the big set, you know, the ones with like 100 colors." She was animated now, excited, leaning forward on her elbows. "I wanted to make something amazing, something to surprise you." "What kind of something?" "I don't know, maybe. Like a mural. Or maybe I could paint on a big canvas. Is there a big wall you'd let me paint on?" Mark set his fork down very carefully. "Lily, have you ever been to the pool without me? Like early in the morning?" Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. A micro change, the kind that lasted less than a second but contained multitudes. "No," she said. "Mommy said we never go anywhere without her or you or Tom. It's a safety rule." "Right, safety rule, good rule." "Why are you asking?" "Just wondering," he said and smiled, and it felt like the most difficult thing he'd ever done. This smile, this casual deflection, this decision to move past the moment. "Eat your pancakes." She did, and the conversation moved on to other things, and Mark sat across from his daughter and felt, for the first time in his life, like he was living in a strange country where all the signs were written in a language he'd forgotten how to read. After breakfast, while Lily was in the guest room unpacking her things, Mark went back outside to the pool. The morning sun had climbed higher now, and the water was even more visibly contaminated, that same murky turquoise, now shot through with swirls of purple and red where the paint was settling and separating. He called his pool maintenance company again, and actually reached someone this time. A tired-sounding man named Derek who listened to Mark's description with the patience of someone who had heard worse. "Drain it," Derek said. "That's your only option. The filter's probably shot. At minimum, you're looking at new cartridges. With the paint exposure, I'd replace the whole system to be safe. Figure $3,500 to $4,000 plus labor. Could be more if there's structural damage." After they hung up, Mark sat on one of the pool loungers and did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He cried. Not dramatically, not with great heaving sobs, but with the quiet, efficient tears of a man who had been backed into a corner by circumstances he didn't fully understand. The tears were for the money, yes, for the disruption and the inconvenience and the injustice of it all. But they were also for something else. They were for the doubt that had taken root in his chest like a seed, for the way his eyes had changed when he looked at his daughter, for the possibility that the person he loved most in the world might have done something that required deception to hide. And most of all, they were for the awful arithmetic of it. If Lily had painted the pool, then Sarah's alibi was a lie. Not a small lie, not a white lie, but a careful, premeditated lie designed to protect their daughter from consequences. Which meant the marriage hadn't ended because of infidelity or incompatibility, or any of the reasons Mark had told himself. It had ended because somewhere along the way, he and Sarah had become the kind of people who told themselves lies and then believed them. Lily stayed close to him for the rest of the morning. She colored in the kitchen while he made lunch. She sat next to him on the couch while he pretended to watch television. She was her normal, cheerful self, and that was almost worse than if she'd seemed guilty, because it meant one of three things. One, she hadn't done it, and his suspicion was poisoning something pure. Two, she had done it, but she'd already compartmentalized it, moved past it, let it fall away like a piece of clothing she'd shed. Three, she'd done it, and she knew he knew, and they were both engaged in an elaborate performance of normalcy. Around 1 o'clock, while Lily was in the guest room napping, Mark did something he knew he shouldn't do. He called Sarah. "What's wrong?" she answered, not bothering with hello, already reading something in the tone of his name. "Nothing, did Lily have any paint at your house? Like, is it possible she—" "No," Sarah said, and the word came so fast, so definitively, that it confirmed every suspicion Mark had ever had about her. "She didn't. She never does things like that. You're being paranoid again." "I'm not being paranoid. There's paint in my pool." "I know about the pool, neighborhood kids. Kids do stupid things. It happens. It's not a referendum on our daughter." "I'm not saying it is. I'm just trying to understand." "What, trying to understand what? Whether I'm lying, whether our daughter is secretly destructive, whether we're all a bunch of liars." Sarah's voice had risen now, taken on that sharp edge that came when she was frightened. "Because that's where this is going, Mark. That's what you do. You take one small thing and you build it into evidence of something larger, something wrong. And you know what? Maybe that's why." She stopped. "Why what?" he said quietly. "Why we didn't work," she finished, but they both knew that wasn't what she'd been going to say. She'd been going to say why she'd had an affair. Why she'd looked outside the marriage for something Mark had failed to provide. Lightness, ease, the ability to accept imperfection without building elaborate theories about what it meant. "I love her," Mark said, "and I love you, and I'm trying to figure out what happened to my pool." "And we're trying to figure out what happened to our lives," Sarah said, not unkindly. "But that's not how this works. You don't solve one problem by creating another. You don't find truth by suspecting the people you love. You just create more damage." She hung up after that, and Mark sat in his kitchen with the phone in his hand, knowing she was right, knowing he was exactly the kind of person she described, and hating himself for it. At 4:45, Mark loaded Lily into his car to drive her back to her mother's house. She was tired from her nap, drowsy and affectionate, and she held his hand the entire drive without saying much. When they pulled up to Sarah's house, their old house, the one he'd left because it held too many memories, Lily unbuckled herself and turned to him before getting out. "Daddy." "Yeah, buddy." "Did I do something wrong at your house?" His heart stopped, actually stopped. "What do you mean?" "You seem sad, sadder than normal. Did I do something wrong?" He looked at his 8-year-old daughter, at her open, honest face, at the genuine concern in her eyes, and he made a choice. He chose to believe her. He chose to believe that some mysteries didn't require solving, that some damage was random and meaningless, and that doubt was just another way of poisoning the present with speculation about the past. "No, buddy," he said and pulled her close. "You didn't do anything wrong. Daddy's just having a hard day. It's nothing to do with you, I promise." She hugged him, and he let himself believe the hug was real, was innocent, was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. When she got out of the car and walked toward the house, she didn't look back. Sarah was waiting at the door, watching them both with that complex expression she always had when transitions occurred between their separate lives. Mark waved, Sarah waved back. Lily waved one more time before disappearing inside. He sat in the driveway for a moment, then he drove home. The pool was waiting for him, that ugly murky turquoise in the gathering darkness. A monument to something he didn't understand and would never fully understand. Doubt, parenthood, the way love could coexist with suspicion. The way a person could look at the person they loved most and see a stranger. By Monday morning, the pool maintenance company would drain the water. By Wednesday, the new equipment would be installed. By next month, it would all be forgotten, folded into the narrative of life, just another thing that happened and then didn't matter anymore. But Mark would remember. He would always remember the moment he chose to believe a lie rather than face the possibility that the truth might destroy him. And in choosing that, he would become the kind of person Sarah had described. Someone who created damage by looking too hard, who poisoned the present with suspicion, who turned love into evidence in a trial that never needed to happen. The water would be clean again soon. But something in Mark would stay murky forever. The pool technician arrived at 7:00 a.m. on Monday with the brisk efficiency of someone who had drained hundreds of contaminated pools and would drain hundreds more before retirement. His name was Derek Chen, not the tired voice from the phone, but his employee, a lean man in his late 20s with tattoos of circuit boards on his forearms, and an attitude that suggested he'd seen worse things than paint in pools, though probably not much worse. "Yeah, this is rough," Derek said, crouching at the pool's edge, his fingers trailing through the murky water. "Paint really got in deep. How long has it been sitting?" "Since Saturday morning," Mark said. He hadn't slept well. He'd spent most of the weekend oscillating between convincing himself that Lily had done it and convincing himself that she hadn't, which was somehow worse than either certainty would have been. 3 days, yeah, that's not great. Could have been worse if you'd taken longer to call, but the suspension's pretty deep. Derek stood up, wiping his hands on his shorts. "We're gonna need to drain it completely, acid wash the shell, replace the cartridges, run the new pump and filter system. Figure 2 days minimum. You got anywhere else to go?" "Work," Mark said. "Cool, I'll send you updates via text." The draining process was something of a marvel. A pump that drew water through a hose and sent it cascading across Mark's backyard in a thin torrent that seemed to mock him with its waste. Water, thousands of gallons of water that he'd carefully maintained, now being returned to the earth as if it had never been refined into perfect hospitality. He left for work at 7:45 a.m., and he didn't allow himself to look back. The bank's administrative offices occupied the 3rd and 4th floors of a 12-story building downtown, and Mark had worked there for 16 years, since just after he married Sarah, actually. He was a senior manager now, which meant he had a corner office and significantly more stress. His day was a careful symphony of client meetings, risk assessments, loan portfolios, and the kind of administrative work that required exactitude and left no room for error. Normally, Mark was excellent at this. He had a mind that saw patterns, that understood systems, that could detect the smallest deviation from established norms. It was the same mind that had built a marriage on rules and expectations, that had tried to construct a post-divorce life with boundaries and schedules and clearly marked territories. Today, it was the worst thing he could have. "Mark, you're with me," his boss, Richard, said around 10 in the morning. "Quarterly review, let's go." Richard's office was aggressively corporate, chrome and glass, and the kind of modern furniture that was designed to intimidate people who'd grown up with older, softer things. Richard himself was pure ambition in a Hugo Boss suit, a man who'd never been married and who viewed family obligations as character flaws. "Your numbers are solid," Richard said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Fourth quarter is looking strong. You brought in the Halloway account, which was smart, however." There was always a however. "However, I'm noticing some inconsistency in your reports. 3 instances in the last month where numbers didn't reconcile properly. Nothing illegal, nothing that's going to trigger an audit, but inconsistent. You're usually more careful than that." Mark opened his mouth to respond and found himself unable to. Because the truth was, he hadn't been careful. Not because of work, but because for the last 72 hours, his brain had been divided between 2 realities. The one where his daughter had committed quiet, calculated vandalism while her mother lied to cover it up, and the one where his paranoia was poisoning his relationship with the person he loved most. "I've had some personal issues," Mark said. "I don't care about your personal issues," Richard said, not unkindly, but with the clear implication that he meant it. I care about your numbers. I care about the liability on our balance sheet. I care about whether I'm going to wake up one morning and find out that one of my managers has been making mistakes that cost the bank money. Can I count on you to refocus? Yes, Mark said, absolutely. Good, because there's a promotion track opening up in the regional office, VP-level position. I'd normally be grooming you for it, but not if you're distracted, not if you're going to bring personal chaos into my office. Richard looked at him across the chrome desk, waiting for acknowledgement of the threat and the promise simultaneously encoded in his words. I understand, Mark said. It won't happen again. It was a lie, or more accurately, it was a promise he couldn't keep. Because as he left Richard's office and returned to his own, as he tried to focus on spreadsheets and risk matrices, his phone buzzed with a text from Derek, the pool technician. Filters worse than I thought. Pump intake has paint residue all the way through, definitely replacing entire system. Bumping labor cost to $2,100, could be higher if we find more damage when we acid wash. $2,100 more. That was 2 weeks of mortgage. That was Lily's orthodontist appointment next month. That was the difference between comfortable and not quite comfortable, between secure and on edge. He looked down at his phone and, without really deciding to, opened his photos and scrolled back to Saturday morning. The pictures he'd taken of the painted pool, the evidence he'd assembled. The buckets, the brush, the empty paint bottle. He studied his own photographs like they were clues, in a case he was building against someone. His daughter. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. Hello? Is this Mark Connors? A woman's voice, professionally neutral. Yes. This is Diane Foster from Sycamore Elementary School. We're calling about an incident that occurred during lunch period today. Your daughter is fine, but we need you to come pick her up. Can you leave work? Mark's entire body went cold. What kind of incident? An altercation with another student. Again, she's fine, no one was seriously hurt, but the student she was fighting with had to get a few stitches. We have a zero-tolerance policy on violence. We're going to need to have a meeting with you, your ex-wife, and the guidance counselor to discuss appropriate next steps. Lily was fighting, Mark heard himself ask, as if the question came from someone else's mouth, someone else's life. Lily doesn't fight. Well, she did today. She put another child in the ground and wouldn't stop hitting her. We had to physically separate them. Mark stood up, his chair scraping backward with a harsh sound that made his coworker in the adjacent office look up with concern. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Mark said and hung up. The drive to Sycamore Elementary was 8 miles, and Mark did it in 11 minutes, which was either brave or reckless, probably both. He pulled into the parking lot at 11:31 a.m. and took the stairs to the main office 2 at a time. Lily was sitting in a plastic chair outside the principal's office, her sundress torn at the sleeve, a small cut visible on her cheekbone. She looked smaller than she ever had, diminished somehow, and when she saw Mark, her face crumpled. Daddy, she said, and started to cry. He picked her up. She was still small enough that he could, still light enough to carry, and held her against him while she sobbed into his shoulder. SHHH, it's okay. I'm here, it's okay. She said something mean, Lily said through tears. She said you and Mommy hated me because you got divorced. She said I was bad luck, and I didn't mean to, but I couldn't stop. A woman in professional attire approached them. Diane Foster, presumably the school administrator. She was the type who'd been in education long enough to have seen every variation of family dysfunction, and her expression suggested that she'd already made up her mind about the Connors household before Mark had even arrived. Mr. Connors, I'm Principal Foster. Why don't we go to my office? He put Lily down, but she grabbed his hand and refused to let go. Together, they filed into the office, where the other student's parent was already waiting. A woman named Michelle, whose daughter's name was Emma, who'd apparently deserved to have her face rearranged by an 8-year-old. Or at least that's what Emma had implied in the twisted logic of childhood conflict. Your daughter attacked mine, Michelle said without preamble, standing up as if the sitting position had become unbearable. My Emma needed 4 stitches. She's traumatized. She said mean things, Lily said, small and defiant and terrified all at once. She said Daddy and Mommy hate me. Because they do, Michelle said, the words seemingly bursting out of her before she could stop them. Look at them. Divorced, separated, living indifferent. That's not helpful, Principal Foster said sharply, and Michelle sat back down, her face red. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Mark learned that Emma's comment, however unkind, had been prompted by Lily mentioning her parents' divorce at all. He learned that Lily had escalated the situation by calling Emma a mean, stupid person. He learned that Emma had then made the comment about Mark and Sarah hatting Lily, and Lily had responded by literally throwing Emma onto the ground and hitting her repeatedly until staff could separate them. It was, by any measure, a disproportionate response. It was also, by any measure, the response of a child who was carrying something heavy and had finally discovered what would make her put it down. We're going to have to suspend Lily for 3 days, Principal Foster said, consulting a policy manual. And we'll need to refer her to the district's counselor for a behavioral assessment before she can return. Given that this is her first incident, it won't go on her permanent record, but if there are any future incidents, we will escalate consequences. Understood, Mark said. He wanted to say something else, wanted to explain about the divorce, about the distance, about the way he'd been suspecting his own daughter of vandalism, about the way that suspicion had probably bled into everything else in her life, into her friendships, into her sense of safety, into her ability to trust that the people who loved her believed in her. But he didn't say any of that. He just took Lily's hand and they left. They didn't go back to work. Mark called Richard's assistant and left a message, personal emergency, would make up the hours, and took Lily home to his empty, still being repaired house. She cried for a while, sitting on the kitchen counter, her little legs swinging, tears tracking down her cheeks. He held her and let her cry, and he didn't ask questions. When she was calmer, she said, "I didn't paint the pool, Daddy." It took him a moment to understand what she meant, to connect the dots between Saturday morning and Monday's meltdown, to realize that his daughter had been carrying the weight of his suspicion. "I know, buddy," he said, and he did know. Not with absolute certainty, but with the certainty that comes from understanding that suspicion itself is a kind of betrayal. I swear I didn't. I wanted to, but Mommy said we couldn't, and so I didn't." "I know." "How do you know?" He thought about this. How could he explain that he'd realized, sometime over the weekend, that the real crime wasn't painting the pool? The real crime was teaching his daughter that he could doubt her without being destroyed by it. The real crime was acting as if love was conditional on behavior, as if trust was something to be earned rather than something to be given to your child as freely as you gave her your name. "Because you're my daughter," Mark said, "and I trust you. I should have trusted you from the beginning." "But something did happen to the pool." "Yeah, something did." "And you don't know what?" "No, I don't." Lily thought about this, processing it the way children do, looking for the logical thread that connects all the pieces. "Maybe it was aliens," she said finally, with the kind of hope that suggested she didn't entirely believe it but wanted him to consider the possibility. He laughed, a real laugh, the first one in days, and pulled her close. "Yeah," he said, "maybe it was aliens." They spent the rest of the day together. They made lunch. They watched a movie. They didn't talk about the pool or the school or any of the things that had fractured in the last 72 hours. They just existed in the space of the present, which was all either of them had ever really been able to do. When Sarah arrived to pick up Lily at 5 o'clock, she took in the scene, Mark and Lily on the couch, their heads together, a blanket draped over both of them, and her expression shifted. She opened her mouth as if to ask what had happened, but she must have read something in Mark's face that told her now wasn't the time. "Lily had an incident at school," Mark said quietly. "She's suspended for 3 days. You'll probably get a call from the principal." Sarah's eyes widened. "What kind of incident?" "She hit another student." Sarah looked at Lily, who looked very small suddenly, who looked like a child who'd been pushed too far by circumstances she didn't create and couldn't control. "We can talk about it later," Mark said. "Right now, I just want her to have a good evening, maybe no drama, maybe just normal." Something in his tone, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the surrender, communicated something to Sarah that lectures never had. She nodded, and she knelt down and pulled Lily into a hug. "Come on, baby," she said. "Let's go home." After they left, Mark stood alone in his living room and listened to the sound of the pool pump, the new system, the replacement, the evidence of expensive damage. He thought about the paint in the water, about mysteries that never get solved, about the way a person can destroy something beautiful simply by looking at it the wrong way. He thought about his daughter hitting another child, the violence of it, the way fear and shame can come out as fury. And he thought about the conversation he'd had with himself over the weekend, the lie he'd chosen to believe, and how that lie had become just another version of the truth. Some damage, Mark understood now, wasn't done by paint in a pool or kids fighting at school. Some damage was done by the things we refused to say out loud, by the doubt we carried silently, by the way we looked at the people we loved and sometimes saw strangers, by the choice to believe a lie, rather than face the possibility that we ourselves might be the thing that needed fixing. Derek Chen called Mark on Wednesday morning with an update that changed everything. "So I found something interesting," Derek said, his tone different now, less professional, more conspiratorial, like he'd discovered something that required witnesses. "When we were acid washing the pool shell, we found some scratches, like something had been pressed against the concrete with force. Looked like initials, maybe, something that was there before the paint got added." "What do you mean, initials?" "Like someone had carved into the concrete. It's faint, but now that the paint's gone, you can see the marks. I took a picture." Derek sent the image to Mark's phone. "Looks like TJ to me. Any idea who that is?" Mark stared at the photograph. The scratches were indeed there, crude but deliberate, pressed into the concrete along the pool's interior edge. TJ. He ran through the neighborhood in his mind, the kids who lived on his street and the surrounding blocks. He came up blank. He was about to ask Derek to send a better image when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Mr. Connors, this is Emma's mom, Michelle. I wanted to apologize for my behavior at the school. I've been thinking about what I said and I feel terrible. Can we talk?" The disconnect between the two moments, the cryptic initials in the pool and the unexpected apology, was jarring enough that Mark almost didn't respond. But something made him. "Sure, when?" "Today, after school. There's a coffee place on Maple. I can meet you at 4. Mark spent the next 6 hours trying to work and failing comprehensively. He stared at spreadsheets. He attended a conference call where he contributed nothing. He ate lunch alone in his office, then returned to staring at spreadsheets. The initials in the pool wouldn't stop bothering him. TJ. He searched his mind for any child in Lily's school named Thomas or Timothy or any other T name. He couldn't find a match. He searched Facebook for neighborhood kids with those initials and came up with nothing relevant. He searched Sarah's phone contacts, which he shouldn't have been able to do, but he'd set up her phone years ago and had never removed his administrator access, and found only the normal cast of characters. Teachers, friends, Tom, her boyfriend, and a large collection of salon appointments. By 3:45 p.m., Mark was sitting across from Emma's mother in a small coffee shop on Maple Street, the same street where the Dollar General was, where Sarah had mentioned buying Lily the paint. The connection felt important, though he couldn't articulate why. Michelle looked different in daylight, away from the defensive posture of the school office. She looked tired in a way that suggested the tiredness wasn't recent. She looked like a woman who'd been carrying something for a long time and had finally decided to put it down. "I owe you an apology," she said after the initial awkwardness of ordering coffee had passed. "And I owe your daughter an apology. What I said in the principal's office it was cruel and it was wrong. You said something harsh. Kids say harsh things to each other. That's not really your fault." "No, but I raised my daughter to say that kind of thing. And I did that because..." Michelle stopped, stirred her coffee, started again. "My husband and I got divorced 2 years ago. My daughter was 6, and I spent about 18 months telling her that the divorce was his fault, that he didn't care about her, that the separation proved something about how unlovable she was. All the things you're not supposed to say. All the poison you're supposed to keep inside yourself instead of feeding it to your kids." Michelle looked up from her coffee. "I recognized that in your daughter," she said. "That fear, that certainty that something about her was fundamentally broken, because I put it there, I did that to her." Mark was quiet for a long moment. "What changed?" he asked finally. "Emma told me that Lily's parents were divorced too, and I thought, oh good, someone else's kid has a broken home. Like I'd been vindicated somehow, like my mistakes had been universal. And then my daughter said something mean about it, and your daughter put her on the ground, and I realized that I was doing the same thing all over again, that I was using my daughter's pain as some kind of weapon." Michelle met Mark's eyes. "I'm in therapy now," she said, "and I've apologized to my ex-husband, and I'm trying to teach my daughter that the world doesn't end when love does, that people can still care about you even if they're not married to each other. I'm trying to undo the damage I did." Mark found himself in the strange position of comforting a stranger about her parenting, while simultaneously hearing the story of his own failings reflected back at him. "For what it's worth," Michelle said, "Lily defended herself, but she didn't create the problem. I created it. You created it. We did." "Yeah," Mark said, "we did." They talked for another hour, and by the time Mark left the coffee shop, he understood something he'd been resisting. The paint in the pool wasn't the real mystery. The real mystery was the portrait of his own parenting that this situation had revealed. The suspicion, the doubt, the way he'd been so focused on preventing chaos that he'd created it instead. He drove home with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and he made a decision. He called Sarah from the car, using the hands-free system. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Not about Lily, about us, about the way I've been." "Mark, I don't think—" "Please, today, after Lily's asleep, can you bring her by, and then can we talk?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Okay, we'll be there around 7. Lily was subdued when Sarah brought her over that evening. The suspension had knocked something out of her, or maybe it had been the realization that her violence had consequences, that you can't just hit other people and expect them to absorb it without damage. Mark made her dinner, her favorite, spaghetti with garlic bread, and they ate together mostly in silence. Sarah sat in the living room, pretending to read her phone, but Mark could see her watching them both with that complex expression that suggested she was standing at a distance from her own life, trying to make sense of the narrative. After Lily went to bed, after he tucked her in and kissed her forehead and promised that everything would be okay, even though he couldn't actually know that, Mark sat down across from Sarah in his living room. "I think Lily painted the pool," he said without preamble. Sarah's entire body went rigid. "I don't think you did it. I don't think Sarah, I don't think you did it maliciously. But I think there's a possibility that one morning very early she got into the paint you'd forbidden her to bring here and she acted out. And I think maybe you covered for her, because that's what mothers do. That's what parents do. We try to protect them from consequences." "Mark, but I don't care about the pool," he continued. "I don't actually care who painted it or how it happened. What I care about is the fact that I didn't trust my own daughter. And worse, I didn't trust you. And even worse than that, I poisoned my relationship with her by acting as if love was contingent on perfect behavior." Sarah put her phone down. "What happened at school?" Mark continued, "with Lily hitting Emma. I think that happened because Lily could feel my doubt. Kids absorb that, they know when they're not trusted, and she responded by being exactly the chaotic thing I feared she'd become. I created the problem and then blamed her for it." "Mark, and I want to stop doing that," he said. "I want to tell you both that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for suspecting you. I'm sorry for suspecting her. I'm sorry for the way I've been operating as if I could control everything through doubt and surveillance and conditional love." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "Yes, Lily did it." Mark nodded. He'd known on some level that she would confirm it. "She woke up really early," Sarah continued. "Like 5 in the morning, she was having a bad dream about you, about how you didn't want to see her anymore. She couldn't fall back asleep. And when I suggested we go to your house for the morning, which I shouldn't have done, which I violated the custody agreement for, she said no. She said you were sad all the time and she wanted to make you happy." Sarah's voice shook. "So she took the paint I'd bought her, and then told her she couldn't have, and she took the buckets from the garage, and she was going to paint the pool tiles in your favorite colors. Blue and green and yellow. All the colors that are in a rainbow, because she thought if she made the pool pretty, you'd be happy again." Mark felt something inside him crack. "She was trying to fix me," he said, not quite a question. "She was trying to fix everything," Sarah said. "She was trying to fix the marriage, fix the divorce, fix you, fix me, fix the way that her whole world had been divided into separate places and separate people. She was 8 years old and she was trying to fix everything." "And you lied to protect her?" "Yes. Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because," Sarah said, with the weariness of someone who'd been carrying this for 3 days, "I didn't know if telling you would destroy the last good thing Lily had, your absolute unconditional love. And I was afraid. I was afraid you'd see her as broken, as the reason for the divorce, as the thing that needed to be fixed too. Mark thought about Michelle in the coffee shop, about the poison parents feed their children, about the ways that damaged people damage other damaged people in their attempts to fix things. I need to talk to Lily, he said. I need to tell her that none of this is her fault, that the divorce, the pool, all of it, it's not her job to fix. It's my job to be okay for her, not the other way around. She knows that, Sarah said gently. She's known it since the moment after she did it. Knowing doesn't make it hurt less, but she knows. When can I see her? Tomorrow, take her for the day, fix things. When Lily arrived the next morning, she was cautious, the way animals are around people who have previously hurt them. She sat on Mark's kitchen counter, her legs not quite swinging, her energy muted. Hey, buddy, Mark said. I want to talk to you about something. Am I in trouble? Her voice was small, worried. No, you're not in trouble, but I think you know about the pool, and I think you know that I figured it out. Lily's lip trembled. I didn't mean to, she said. I wanted you to be happy. Mark set down the coffee he'd been holding and picked her up, lifting her off the counter. He held her against him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, and he felt her crying against his shoulder. Oh, Lily, he said. Sweet girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you ever felt like it was your job to make me happy. That's not your job. Your job is just to be a kid and be happy and live your life. That's it. My job is to love you and take care of you and be okay for you, not the other way around. But the pool cost so much money, Lily said through tears. Mommy said it was expensive and I messed it up and... The pool is fine. The pool is just a pool. It doesn't matter. You matter. You're what matters. Do you understand? She nodded against his shoulder, but he wasn't sure she actually believed it. He set her down and knelt in front of her so they were at eye level. I want to tell you something, he said. When I first found the paint, I didn't trust you. I thought maybe you'd done something bad and lied about it. And instead of just asking you, instead of trusting my daughter, I suspected you. And I'm sorry for that. I'm so sorry. You don't deserve that. You deserve to be believed. You deserve to have a dad who knows, just knows, that you're a good person. I did do something bad, Lily said very quietly. You did something kind, Mark said. You did it in a way that had consequences, and we need to talk about that. We need to talk about how sometimes when we're trying to fix things, we end up breaking other things. And that's okay. That's how we learn. But what you did wasn't bad. It was a mistake made by someone who was carrying too much, who was trying to fix something that wasn't her job to fix. Does that make me bad? No, Mark said. It makes you 8 years old. It makes you my daughter. It makes you exactly the right amount of human. They spent the day together, and Mark told her stories about divorce, about how sometimes people love each other very much but still can't be married to each other, about how the marriage ending didn't change anything about how much they both loved her. He told her about Emma's mother, and about the lies parents tell their children without meaning to, about how he was trying to be better, about how she was helping him do that just by existing and by being herself. By the end of the day, Lily seemed lighter, not as if the weight had disappeared entirely, but as if some of it had been redistributed, shared, made more bearable by the act of being named. When Sarah picked her up at 5, Mark walked them both to the door. Thank you, he said to Sarah. For what? For protecting her, for lying to me, for being the kind of mother who does that. Sarah smiled, sad and real. She's worth protecting. Yeah, Mark said, she is. The pool maintenance company finished the repairs on Saturday morning. Derek Chen stood in the backyard with Mark, looking at the newly gleaming water, the newly installed equipment, the evidence of restoration. Good as new, Derek said. Better than new, actually. Better pump, better filter, should last you a good 10 years. Mark nodded, but he was thinking about the scratches in the concrete, the carving that had been revealed beneath the paint. TJ. He'd never figured out what those initials meant. Maybe something from a previous owner. Maybe something that had been there so long it was just part of the landscape now, invisible until the disaster had stripped everything away. Thanks, he said to Derek. That evening, Lily came over for her weekend visit. The first thing she wanted to do was see the pool. It's clean now, Mark said, all fixed. She stood at the edge, looking down at her reflection in the blue, and then she turned to Mark with the most serious expression an 8-year-old can manage. It's pretty, she said. Yeah, it is. I'm sorry I messed it up. I know, buddy, and thank you for that, but I already forgave you. From the moment I understood what you were trying to do, I forgave you. That's what parents do. She nodded, processing this, and then she said, "Can I come swimming?" Yeah, Mark said, "Let's swim." They got into their suits and they went into the water, and for the first time in a week, Mark felt the suspension of weightlessness. The way the water held him, the way it held them both, equal and safe and exactly the right temperature. Lily swam in circles around him, and they played a game of Marco Polo. And she laughed that pure, uncomplicated laugh that comes from a child who's been given back her sense of safety. And Mark understood, finally, that the real damage had never been to the pool. The real damage had been healed the moment he'd chosen to trust his daughter over his fear, the moment he'd admitted his doubt, the moment he'd said, "I'm sorry, and I was wrong." The water was clean now, clear and bright and reflective. And underneath it all, the concrete carried the evidence of what had been, TJ, those mysterious initials. But nobody needed to know what they meant anymore. They were just part of the foundation now, just proof that something had happened here, and then it had passed, and then everything began again. 3 weeks after the pool was repaired, a woman appeared at Mark's office asking for him by name. Her name was Teresa Jackson, though she introduced herself as TJ from the moment Mark stepped into the waiting area. She was in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime managing other people's expectations. "I apologize for coming without an appointment," she said, standing up from the visitor's chair. "But I was in town visiting my mother, and I saw the name of your company in her neighborhood newsletter. Your address is the same house where I grew up." Mark's mind went immediately to the initials carved into the concrete of his pool, and something clicked into place. "You lived on Meadowbrook?" he asked. "Until I was 17, TJ said. "My family moved in 1997, left in 2003. The Hendersons bought from us, and then presumably many owners after that." Mark invited her into his office, and she sat across from him with the kind of deliberate composure that suggested she'd been practicing this conversation. "I don't know if this is relevant," she said, "but I saw in the newsletter that there had been some issues with the pool. Vandalism, apparently, paint contamination. I'm sorry to hear that. That house meant a lot to my family." "Actually," Mark said slowly, "I think the paint in the pool might have been my daughter. She didn't mean to. It was complicated. It's been resolved." TJ smiled, and there was something in that smile that suggested she understood complexity, that she understood the ways that children sometimes try to fix broken things and end up breaking them worse. "Well," she said, "that's better than the alternative. When I read about it, I was concerned that maybe history was repeating itself." "What do you mean?" TJ leaned back in her chair. "When I was a teenager," she said, "I carved my initials into the concrete of that pool, TJ Teresa Jackson. I was having a hard time at home. My parents were going through a divorce. My father was drinking. My mother was starting to fall apart. And I was 16 and convinced that if I could somehow mark the place permanently, leave evidence of my existence, it would mean I wasn't going to disappear. That even if my family fell apart, there would be proof that I had been there." Mark was quiet, listening. "I did a lot of things during those years," TJ continued. "Some of them were self-destructive. Some of them were attempts at destruction in the classical sense. I was angry at everything, my parents, myself, the world. And one day my mother found me in that pool house covered in paint, having destroyed a whole box of craft supplies. She took photographs. She documented it. And later, she used those photographs in divorce court to argue that I was proof of our family's disintegration, that my behavior demonstrated their inability to parent effectively." TJ's voice remained steady, but there was a weight to it, the weight of something carried across decades. "My behavior wasn't the cause of the divorce," she said, "but it became evidence of it. It became a proof point in an argument about custody and fitness and who had failed whom. And I carried that for a very long time, the idea that my pain, my acting out, had somehow accelerated the dissolution of my family. It took me years to understand that the reverse was true. My behavior was a symptom, not a cause. I was reacting to the destruction already underway." "Why are you telling me this?" Mark asked. "Because," TJ said, "I carved those initials into your pool in hopes of leaving a permanent mark, of saying I was here and I mattered. And I just learned through the neighborhood newsletter that those initials were discovered after paint was put into the pool. And I realized that my attempt to leave a permanent mark of my childhood trauma had become, perhaps, a message to whatever child might live in that house next. A warning, maybe, or a map. She pulled an old photograph out of her purse, a Polaroid from the 1990s, faded and worn at the edges. It showed a teenage girl, unsmiling, standing in front of a pool. Initials were barely visible at the edge of the frame, carved into concrete. "That's me," TJ said. "At 17, still carrying the weight of my parents' marriage ending, still trying to make permanent something that was already slipping away." Mark looked at the photograph and at the woman across from him, and he understood with a kind of vertigo that he was looking at a future. A possible future where Lily would be an adult carrying the scars of her childhood, the guilt of the paint in the pool, the knowledge that her attempts to fix things had become evidence against her. "Does it get better?" he asked. "Yes," TJ said. "It gets better. It took therapy, distance, time, and the ability to forgive my parents for being human. But it got better. I'm telling you this because I want you to know, if your daughter put paint in that pool, it's not because she's broken. It's because she's responding to brokenness. And the best thing you can do for her is to make sure she knows that's not her job to fix, that she's not responsible for healing what adults have broken." Mark nodded slowly. "I think I'm beginning to understand that," he said. "Good," TJ said. She stood up, preparing to leave. "Because I'll tell you what I wish someone had told me at her age. The initials I carved into your pool weren't a permanent mark of my existence. They were just evidence of pain, and they could have been erased at any time by someone who knew they were there. The permanent mark, that comes later when you learn to forgive the people who hurt you, including yourself." After TJ left, Mark sat in his office and pulled up the photograph she'd left for him, a digital copy she'd emailed before departing. He looked at that teenage girl, at the pain that was visible even through the graininess of a Polaroid from 1997. He thought about Lily, about the way she'd tried to fix the world with paint and water, about the way she'd carried the weight of his unhappiness as if it were her responsibility. He called Sarah. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Is Lily okay?" "Yes, Lily's fine. But I think we both need to do better about not letting her absorb the consequences of our decisions, not letting her believe that she needs to fix things for us." Sarah was quiet for a moment then. "You're right. I think we should talk to her together, all three of us. And I think we should be very clear that the divorce isn't her fault and never was, and that there's nothing she needs to do, nothing she can do to change it." "What brought this on?" Sarah asked. "A visitor," Mark said. "Someone from the past. Someone who left initials in the concrete of the house I bought. Someone who showed me what happens when children carry too much for too long." That Saturday, Mark, Sarah, and Lily sat down in Mark's living room, and they had what might have been one of the most important conversations of Lily's early life. Or it might have been mundane, depending on who was counting the significance of things. They told her that the divorce wasn't her fault. They told her that it wasn't anything she did or failed to do. They told her that both of them loved her, and that the love was separate from the divorce, separate from their failure to stay married to each other. "But what if you both loved me enough?" Lily asked with the terrible logic of childhood. "Wouldn't you still be married?" "Love isn't the only thing you need to be married," Sarah said gently. "You need other things too. You need to understand each other. You need to be able to grow together. You need to want to stay. And your dad and I didn't have all of those things." "But now you could," Lily said, "if you tried." "No, baby," Mark said. "We couldn't, and that's not sad even though it feels sad. Sometimes people love each other but can't be married to each other, and that's okay. That's how the world works." "It doesn't feel okay." "No," Mark said. "It doesn't, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that this is something you have to live with. I'm sorry that we made decisions that affected you. But I want you to know that you didn't cause it and you can't fix it, and it's not your job to try." Lily nodded, but Mark wasn't sure the words had landed. He supposed they wouldn't, not fully, not until she was older and had enough distance to understand that love and marriage and divorce were complex things, not the simple binary of good or bad. But he'd planted a seed, at least. He'd made it clear that the responsibility wasn't hers, and that was something. After Sarah left, after Lily was asleep in the guest room, Mark went outside and stood at the edge of the pool. The water was perfect again, crystalline, clean, reflecting the night sky. He thought about TJ, about the teenage girl who'd carved her initials into concrete, about the woman she'd become. He thought about the way damage echoes across time, how one person's pain can become another person's legacy. And he thought about Lily, about the small child trying to fix things with paint and water, about the adult she would become, about the stories she'd tell herself about this time in her life. He made a decision. The next morning, he hired someone to remove the initials from the pool, not because they were bad, but because he wanted to erase that particular evidence of pain. He wanted the pool to be just a pool, not a repository for the trauma of previous inhabitants. When the work was done, when the concrete was smooth again, Mark took Lily outside to look at it. "It's fixed," she said. "Yeah," Mark said, "it is." "So it's like it never happened." "No," Mark said, "it happened, but we get to decide what it means now instead of letting it tell us what to think." Lily considered this with the gravity that children sometimes bring to complicated truths. "That's good," she said finally. "I'm glad." 6 months passed, and the shape of life reorganized itself around the new understanding Mark and Sarah had arrived at. Lily's suspension from school led to the guidance counselor meetings that led to the therapist that Sarah and Mark jointly agreed to pay for. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Reeves, helped Lily understand that the divorce was not her responsibility, that she was not a broken thing that needed fixing, that the feelings she had were normal and didn't define her. Dr. Reeves also saw Mark, every other week, on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock, in an office that smelled like lavender and contained far too many houseplants. In those sessions, Mark began the long process of understanding how his own childhood had shaped the way he parented, how his father's inability to emotionally regulate had made Mark desperate for control, how control had become his primary tool for relating to the world, how that tool had failed him in almost every important relationship, but he'd kept using it anyway. The divorce wasn't about Sarah or infidelity, Dr. Reeves said one afternoon, not as a question, but as a statement she was inviting him to examine. It was about the fact that Sarah wanted a partner and you wanted a subordinate. You wanted someone who would organize herself around your emotional needs, and when she wouldn't do that, you interpreted it as failure. "That's not fair," Mark said, but without conviction. "No, it's quite fair," Dr. Reeves said. "The question is whether you're going to repeat that pattern with your daughter." That question echoed through Mark's weeks. He thought about it when he was with Lily, when he caught himself trying to control her emotions, when he wanted to fix her sadness by making it about his failure. Slowly, incrementally, he got better at letting her be a person separate from his needs. The real turning point came in August, 8 months after the paint incident, when Lily asked if she could have Emma over for a pool party. "Emma," Mark said, "the girl from school." "Yeah, we're friends now," Lily said. "We both got counseling and now we like each other. Can she come?" Mark's first instinct was to say no, to protect Lily from the complications of friendship, to keep her in a controlled environment. His second instinct was to catch his own impulse and say yes instead. "Yeah," he said, "absolutely." The pool party was a small affair. Just Lily, Emma, a few other kids from school, and Sarah, who came to help supervise and to model for her daughter what healthy parental cooperation looked like. Mark stood on the edge of the pool watching them play, watching Lily splash and laugh, watching her play with the girl she'd previously assaulted, and he felt something crystallize inside him. This was what he'd been trying to protect against with all his control and his suspicion and his need for certainty. He'd been trying to protect against the possibility that Lily might get hurt, might make mistakes, might have complicated feelings about people. And by trying to prevent all of that, he'd been the one causing the damage. Richard from work had gotten a promotion and moved to the regional office. Mark didn't apply for Richard's old job, even though he was the obvious choice. Instead, he took a lateral move to a different department, one that paid slightly less but required fewer hours. He started going to therapy not just for his own issues, but for the specific practice of learning to be present with his daughter without an agenda. Sarah started dating someone new in October, not Tom, who'd faded out of the picture around the time of Lily's suspension, and Mark, unexpectedly, was able to be happy for her. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, but it was something. It was the ability to see her as a person separate from his pain, separate from his failure to keep her. "His name's David," Sarah said, introducing them at Lily's winter concert. "He has 2 kids from his first marriage. They're older than Lily, but they seem to like her." "That's good," Mark said and meant it. David was a normal man, not particularly remarkable, not particularly flawed. He was what Sarah needed, someone who could make space for her without needing her to solve his problems. In December, almost exactly a year after the pool incident, Mark received an email from TJ Jackson. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she wrote, "and I realized I never asked you about your daughter. I spent so much time talking about myself, about my childhood. I wonder if I could impose on you one more time? I'd like to come back and see the house, see the pool. And if you're willing, I'd like to meet your daughter. I think there might be something valuable in two people, separated by 40 years, who both tried to fix things with paint and water and came out the other side with some understanding." Mark read the email 3 times before responding. His first instinct was to protect Lily from the complication of meeting a stranger whose trauma was echoed in her own story. His second instinct was to recognize that instinct for what it was, control masquerading as protection, and to ask Lily instead. "There's someone who wants to meet you," Mark said that evening. "She lived in our house a long time ago when she was your age, and she went through something kind of like what you went through. She wants to talk to you about it, if you're okay with that." Lily considered this seriously. "Will it be sad?" she asked. "Maybe a little," Mark said, "but I think it might also be comforting to know that someone else has been where you are." "Okay," Lily said, "I'll do it." TJ came on a Saturday afternoon in mid-December. She brought cookies, peanut butter homemade, and she was less formal than she'd been in Mark's office, more human somehow. Lily was nervous at first, the way children are around adults they haven't met before. But TJ had the gift of making people feel seen without making them feel exposed. She asked Lily questions and actually listened to the answers. She told her own stories from her own childhood in a way that didn't burden Lily with the weight of a cautionary tale, but offered it as companionship instead. They sat on the edge of the pool, not in it, just on the concrete, dangling their feet over the water. And TJ told Lily about the pool from her childhood, about her parents' divorce, about the paint and the anger and the conviction that it was all her fault. "Was it," Lily asked, "your fault?" "No," TJ said. "It took me a very long time to understand that, but the answer is no. It was my parents' failure to make room for their own pain without pushing it onto me. And I think that's what happens in a lot of divorces. The kids get pushed into the space where the pain is." "My dad did that," Lily said quietly. "He was suspicious of me because of the pool." "Your dad is trying to be better," TJ said. "I can tell he's thinking about this. He's asking questions. That's how people change." They talked for 2 hours, and Mark listened from inside the house, heard the easy way they communicated, the way they were bearing witness to each other's pain without needing to fix it. When TJ left, Lily hugged her, surprising both of them. "Thank you," Lily said. "For what?" "For being like me," Lily said. "For being like me and growing up okay." On the first anniversary of the paint in the pool, Mark stood at the edge of the water with Lily, and they dropped a flower into it. A sunflower, because Lily had specifically requested it. "I'm sorry," Lily said, in the way that children apologize for things long after everyone else has forgiven them, for messing it up. "It needed to be messed up," Mark said. "It led us all to pay attention to things we were ignoring." "Are you still sad?" Lily asked. "Sometimes," Mark said. "But I'm sad in a different way now. I'm sad about things that were outside my control instead of sad about things I think I should have been able to fix." "That sounds better." "It is better," Mark said. "Do you still want to paint?" "Yeah," Lily said, "but on a canvas next time and with your permission and not trying to fix you." "That sounds like a plan." In the years that followed, the paint in the pool incident became a story that the family told, not as a trauma, but as a turning point. Sarah married David, and Lily got stepsiblings, and the family tree became more complicated but also more resilient. Mark became the kind of father who could see his daughter's pain without needing to solve it, who could sit with her sadness without trying to fix it. He became the kind of man who could see his ex-wife's happiness without poisoning it with his own regret. And Lily became the kind of child who understood, early and deeply, that people could love each other and still disappoint each other, that families could fracture and still hold together, that the damage done to you was not the same as the damage you were. The pool remained clean. It never got vandalized again. Sometimes Mark would stand at its edge and think about the initials that had been carved into the concrete before he'd had them removed, about TJ and her teenage pain, about the way one person's attempt to leave a mark could become another person's map. And he would think about the paint, about how a child's act of desperate love had required him to choose between suspicion and trust, between control and faith. He'd chosen faith, finally. He'd chosen to believe in his daughter over his fear, and that choice had changed everything. The pool reflected the sky, infinite and clear. And Mark would dive into it, and for a moment, he would feel the weightlessness of being held by something larger than himself, something that didn't ask him to be anything other than what he was.